G'day everyone, you're watching Tim Topham TV episode 19, the second part in our series on everything but the pieces, which we started last week with Sam Coates, looking at oral tests and sight reading. In this episode, we're going to focus on helping you get the most out of teaching technical work and general knowledge, two of those other kind of crucial aspects of sending kids for exams. And we're talking with expert teacher Abe Cytrynowski. Now, don't worry if you don't use exams in your lessons very often, or you don't send kids to sit exams, because these are obviously two vital aspects of piano pedagogy in general. So you're going to get heaps out of this conversation, regardless of where you stand with regard to exams. Now, before we start, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, the exam board, ABRSM, who have some of the coolest apps on the market for music teachers at the moment. Did you know that they have an app called Speed Shifter, which allows you to slow down and loop any piece of music? This is great if you have students working with backing tracks. And they also have the award-winning Oral Trainer app, which I mentioned in the last couple of episodes, which is now available for grades 1 to 5 and 6 to 8 of the ABRSM syllabus. And if your students are actually working on ABRSM repertoire, definitely check out the Piano Practice Partner, which is another app that helps make practice more fun and engaging for students. So you can check all of these out today by heading to www.abrsm.org/apps, APPS. So let's get straight into it now. You're going to love this interview. Chatting with Abe has always ended in lots of laughter with us. He is great fun to chat with, and you're going to really get a sense of his fun sense of humour. I met Abe through last week's guest, Sam Coates, when the two of them were actually presenting a workshop on exactly this topic in Melbourne a couple of years ago. And look, we just got him like a house on fire, and I thought ever since we had to have him on the show. He's been teaching for many years, and he's actually starting to wind back some of his teaching at the moment, but he hasn't lost any of that kind of passion, and you'll see what I mean when we start talking about it. He loves and lives making technical work interesting and exciting for students, which is just so good to share with everyone. And he gives a really lovely tribute at the end too, so stay tuned for that, which was really touching to hear. As a special part of this episode too, I've created a very special 3-page cheat sheet which you can download and have on the side of the piano, and it's all about ways to turn off autopilot when students are practicing or playing scales and arpeggios, because that is one of the things we talk about in this episode that is just an absolute killer for students' abilities to play scales effectively. It's when they're just doing it mindlessly. So we're giving you 3 pages of just the best ideas and hopefully some new ones you wouldn't have thought of for ways of keeping things interesting for them. So it's a completely free resource, and you can download that from the show notes page. And the show notes page is timtopham.com/episode 19. So without further ado, here is the interview with Abe Cytrynowski, talking all about general knowledge and technical work. Okay, Abe, welcome to the show.
Welcome. No, I shouldn't say welcome. Thank you very much. And I'm pleased to be here.
And thank you very much for doing this on what is school holidays over here in Australia. The sun's coming out. It's summertime. Is just kind of on the horizon. So I do appreciate you doing this on your time off.
It's a total pleasure.
It's great to speak with you. So, Abe, can you tell us a little bit about your background, just briefly, and how you've come to kind of having a bit of a focus on these two aspects of exams, which is general knowledge and technical work?
All right. The only thing, Tim, is the short version of my life takes just under 3 weeks. But
okay, let's make it only the relevant parts mainly to what we're talking about today, I think.
Okay, I'll give it a go. I started off, I guess, in the 1970s as music coordinator of a secondary school, where I learned probably more about organisation and getting things done than anything else. But still, that was very, very effective and good for me, setting up a music program and so forth. Because I had actually already had a couple of publications that were selling it. For those who don't know, Allen's was a rather large retail music chain here. I had a couple of publications, just small teaching aids available. I was that sounds very, very egocentric. There was an exam board that's just started called ANSCA, and they wanted a 9th member on their board, a younger member who had some some drive, and I guess because of the small things that I had done, they asked me to join the board, which was fantastic for me. So I was invited to join the ANSCA examining board, and in 1983. I wrote their modern syllabus, which involved, and look, I will go on, I'll move through this fast, but what that involved for me was this audacious plan to take the whole of the modern genre of popular music and divide it up into jazz, Latin American, boogie, blues. And I remember being on the 10th floor of Allen's, and the print manager would come up with trolleys of music, truckloads of music for me to sort out and categorise into different genres, because everything that went on the syllabus was potential sales. So I learned a lot about repertoire in doing that, and I kept updating the syllabus for quite some time.
Actually, that's quite relevant, Abe, because in a couple of podcasts ago, I interviewed Tony Betros, who's general manager at ANSCA. So we were just talking about, in fact, the modern piano syllabus, which I now know that you were a part of forming. So that's actually a great connection.
Oh, it was quite amazing, because it really, in those days, this was 1983. It's not as though we all had internet and computers at our fingertips. I sat there probably doing maybe 1,000 pieces and recording all the details on index cards. And
oh gosh.
anyway, moving on, because this can't take 3 weeks.
Yeah.
After doing the modern syllabus and examining and continually for ANSCA, as I still do, I became more and more interested in technical work, which is it's almost like saying you're fascinated by this collecting stamps from Tasmania or something. Sorry, Taswegians, but the scales became a passion. Scales and arpeggios became a passionate interest of mine, and as a result of that, I produced a teaching aid called the Scale Card System, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But that produced that opened other doors and created different opportunities. For example, going around the country doing workshops, which I enjoyed doing, and that's how I came up. I met a lot of other teachers, and that's how I came into contact with Samantha Coates, who I know has just done an interview with you too, and people would know of her through her Blitz series. And it was through the scale cards that we met, and we developed a friendship, and that led on to the next professional milestone in my life, I guess, which was producing a general knowledge book with Samantha, and that's what we're going to be talking about later today, general knowledge aspects of music. And am I talking too fast, Tim?
No, not at all. It's great.
Oh, it's very good. Thank you. We continued working together, and I just have to say it was a sheer pleasure working with Sam. And I usually don't collaborate with other people, but it was a lot of hard work putting this book together, but it was great fun. And because we worked together so well, and because we then started doing workshops around Australia to do with general knowledge and me talking about scales, we decided to create an app together, a scale app called the Scale Blitzer app. And that in itself created yet another drive around the country doing workshops and things. So it's been heaps of fun doing all of that. And through all of that, of course, I've been teaching full-time, examining, and I'm of late performing more too. That's just been a more recent, in the last 2 or 3 years thing. And I've really enjoyed, I guess, putting into practice the things that I've been talking about for so long. And that was the short version. Thank you.
Okay. No, I think it's important that people kind of understand where people I'm talking to are coming from, because I know, we've known each other for a little while. So I think that's important, particularly when we're talking about the two aspects we're talking about today, which are, such important parts of exams and musical knowledge in general. So can we start by talking about general knowledge first?
Sure.
And just in case there's anyone listening that doesn't put students in for an exam and doesn't know what we're talking about, or it means something different in other countries, what are we talking about when we're talking about general knowledge?
Well, look, general knowledge, I guess in short, is the total background package of a piece of music or a program of music. So I'm talking about, if the piece is called Rhapsody or Sarabande, what does that mean? An examiner, well, in Australia anyway, all the exam systems, a student, even at the grade 1 level or the prelim level, if they're playing a little sarabande, the examiner is quite in his or her right to say, what is a sarabande? Which is a fair enough question if you're playing a sarabande. It involves knowing who the composer is at various stages up the exam level hierarchy of difficulty, knowing who the composer was, especially the period that the piece was written in, how characteristic is the piece of the period that it comes from. So that involves a knowledge of period style and analysis of the key structure and form, modulations, other compositions by the same composer, the whole background deal. That's what general knowledge is.
And, most teachers would probably agree that if we're talking about technical work and general knowledge, technical work is pretty important. Most teachers would agree with that. I think fewer would agree that they spend the same amount of time on general knowledge. And I hate to say it, but I have a feeling that similar to what I was talking about with Sam and the oral tests in particular, they're left to the last minute. And you have this sudden mad rush before an exam or an audition or whatever it is. The teacher suddenly throws all this information at the student and says, here's your general knowledge information. So I guess, why does that happen? And is that the right way to approach this?
No, I mean, look, if my life story was going to take 3 weeks, the short version, this could take 3 years. I feel it really... Look, the difficulty for me is that I feel passionately about the importance of technical work and general knowledge, and it's very hard to create a Richter scale of importance. But I guess I could put it most succinctly, I would say, by saying that technical work helps students to actually play the notes. And where the heart and mind comes in, that is to interpret and to understand what they're playing, that's where general knowledge comes in to actually help and to inform and to deepen, to add dimension to what the fingers are doing, so that they're not just notes on the page, but there's a rich experience, an emotional experience happening for both performer and listener. So I can't imagine one going without the other. They're symbiotic.
And it's interesting to note that I think general knowledge, or viva voce, or whatever you want to call it, is one of the few things that continues right up to licentiate level.
Oh, yes.
In fact, it's the only, I think in most exam boards, it's the only thing that continues along with playing your pieces. So, that's a good indication of its importance.
Well, look, it's really funny here because, you'll have to stop me if you feel that I'm rambling here, but I often have been in a situation where I visit friends and their children have just done an exam, grade 5, 6, 7, and I'll ask them what they've just been playing. Often they won't even know the names of their pieces. Believe it or not, really, they'll say, oh, it's a study or of some sort, or it's a Scarlatti piece. Maybe often they'll know half the name of the piece. They won't know the composer or they don't know the period or whatever because they haven't been given the information yet. And to me, it just seems insane that you can. It's almost like. Can I go on?
Yeah.
All right. I do remember, now this is a digression, but I think it's a worthwhile digression. I remember in the 1970s when I was doing English Lit at Melbourne Uni, they had this really strange attitude where they would give us a sheet in a tutorial with a poem, no reference to the poet or the period. We just had to talk about that poem and deconstruct its elements, and which was beneficial, I guess, to some extent, but what a barren experience, an academic experience devoid of any depth, really, in my opinion. It's almost, I sometimes think, fancy playing a piece by Beethoven and not knowing that Beethoven was prone to mood swings, that he had a problem with hearing, that he composed so many of his pieces when he was deaf. Or imagine playing Debussy's Engulfed or Submerged Cathedral, not knowing the delicious, gorgeous story or legend behind the sinking of the cathedral, which is what this is on about. It just seems to rob a piece or an experience of so much more. So I can't imagine that you could teach or experience a piece as fully as you could without knowing as much as possible about it.
Yeah,
so that's
I agree.
3-year version. Reduced.
Yeah. And look, I remember when I did my diploma, I spent a lot of time studying the general knowledge stuff, and I had specialist teachers help me with it. And I've in fact now put all of that online, and I can put some links to that for anyone that's interested in it. But it did shape seriously at that level of playing anyway the way I approached some of the pieces, just knowing the background, the things that were going on in the composer's life at the time that he or she was writing, or he was writing these things.
Yeah.
I can see its relevance, but I guess it's hard at those lower levels to help students understand the importance? I think perhaps that's more of the difficulty.
Well, look, can I just say that I agree with you, it is, but I do think teachers, and I don't want to sound as I'm teacher bashing, but I think too often teachers perpetuate and replicate the experience that they had learning general knowledge. So it's something that they give 6 weeks, 5 weeks, 4 weeks before the exam. And yes, younger students probably see it as something they've got to get through too, but it can be changed even by teachers. I think 7-year-olds can get onto the net and find another piece written by Mozart. They can find what Mozart's other names were or whatever, and so they can become co-partners and collaborators in this research about pieces, and just learn that it's not something that happens at the end, but it's like a delicious slow bake where the flavours are enhanced to the piece, just like I just did a Jamie Oliver slow cook, and it was on for about 6 hours, and I'm totally into slow cooking, and I think it's general knowledge ought to be.
Yeah, I love it. I love the analogy. And look, I try and do that with my students. I mean, the most obvious thing is to make sure that they understand what the title is. And to me, form should precede a lot of learning of music, because it, opens up the structure and allows people to understand things. So there's two things you're already covering as part of your teaching.
Yes.
And I was talking as well with Sam about this idea of just not pigeonholing things so much. So we're not sort of closing the music books and opening up the general knowledge books, but actually it's an all-encompassing experience.
Look, yes, I know it is, and I don't want to sound like the Dalai Lama here, like Mr. Perfect, far be it, because I've also had experiences, to be honest, where I've left general knowledge to the last 3 or 4 weeks because of the demands of teaching sometimes and life, But truly, I really make it a challenge and a principle to try to say something new about each piece every lesson. So it's like a homeopathic thing, drop by drop. There's always something more to say that's going to add yet another layer and level. And I think if that's what we present to ourselves as teachers as a challenge, it's a win-win situation for everybody.
So is there any resource that you particularly like to use to either trigger those questions or to research things? I mean, we can all use the internet, obviously.
Look, yeah, well, I know this might sound a little partisan of me or a little opportunistic, but I did mention the general knowledge book that Sam and I wrote, and yes, of course, there's a point to me saying this because it's our product, but really, I have to say, in all honesty, that if you asked me for a really good definition right now of a rhapsody, for example, because that's the example I used before, I could come up with something that it's a free-form piece, but I'd be thinking hard about how to present that for an 8 or a 9-year-old. And I think the tricky thing for teachers is that, yes, we've got Wikipedia and we've got all of the resources in the world. We don't have to go to the Britannica or Groves. We can go straight to the internet, but then we have to rephrase and reword and collect from here and there and everywhere to present something that's accessible and tangible and usable by especially young students. So what Sam and I did, and it took a lot of thinking and a lot of work, is that we produced definitions, first and foremost, of absolutely every title imaginable. We went through Associate Board, Trinity, ANSCA, Amy B. We went to every title of every piece of every grade.
Wow.
And nearly killed us, and we wrote I'm very, very slacky because I'm at the moment I'm in a country place that my partner and I are renting, and I forgot to bring the general knowledge book and the other product, my other teaching aid here, and so I just have to talk about them.
Yeah, no, but that's okay because we can send links to it and all that kind of stuff.
That's right.
But, it's a go-to reference that I've got on my desk next to the massive, great, fat. I can't even remember what it's called. The Groves Companion to Music or something.
Do you
know the one I mean? I was given it when I was just starting teaching. And look, it's fantastic, but it's a tome. It's a great doorstep.
I know, it is. And so what we've done... I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to...
No, go for it.
I've got to be the urbane interviewee.
Like that'll never happen.
Well, I'm too manic. So what we've done in every case, we've got a paragraph, let's say about the saraband, in bold print, one sentence for the little E's, that a saraband is a dance form from the Baroque period, and that it's usually in triple meter with a second beat, not even that much, just something very, very basic that an examiner would accept. And then in normal font, we've got a much more detailed definition, but always in language that's accessible, so the teachers don't have to look up, for example, minuet on Wikipedia and go through the whole historical chronology that might be 20 pages and then create something on file that they've got to go and reword for various level students. So we've got definitions, we've got a huge chunk on period style, on the elements of what makes up Baroque music, classical music, romantic music in terms of harmony, melody, phrase length, pedal, rubato. We've got a section on the main 150 composers that appear in all the syllabi, with their contemporaries and their main pieces. So it really is a one-stop shop. So in answer to your question, and it's not just product pushing here, because I do think it's a really valuable resource that stops or that saves people wasting precious time going hither and everywhere and shopping around when it's all in the one book. And truly, my advanced students just have to buy the book, because then I can say, look, before we even talk about the fugue, read the stuff on the fugue, and then we can have a discussion. Anyway, that's my short answer. Yeah.
Okay, so let's leave general knowledge, because I think that's pretty good coverage of that, and let's talk about technical work. You've already said you're very passionate about technical work.
Embarrassed to say so.
I think that's fair enough.
It's my G major, really.
I think it's great. I think it'd be great if more of us, perhaps you can encourage us through this little podcast in the next 15 minutes to be more passionate ourselves. Can you give us some tips? What are your best tips for keeping this side of piano teaching fun, interesting, productive, effective?
Okay, well, probably the one thing I would say that is my greatest tip, and also my greatest worry about the way scales are taught, is that scales, like a lot of repertoire, scales and arpeggios are taught so that students end up unwittingly playing an automatic pilot. And from the performing I've been doing the last few years, I have come to realise more and more and more that the moment something is just on automatic pilot, you may succeed, but if the wind changes direction, you're a goner. It just takes a noise outside or a sudden thought, what am I doing? Was that finger 3? And you're gone. So playing scales and practicing scales that way anyway, I think, is mind-numbing. And the moment you decide as a teacher that you're going to do everything in your power to make the scale playing conscious, then it's just heaps of fun, because there is no end to what you can do to make scale practice challenging and heaps of fun, and in so doing, absolutely rock solid. So
I say the same things, by the way, Abe, to my students. If they're playing a scale with one hand and they can be on Facebook chatting with their friends with the other hand, or watching TV or whatever it is, then they're not playing. They're not practicing. They're just.
That's right.
It's mindless. It's actually a waste of time.
Yes, and it might actually save their day on the occasion, but it's not durable. Look, something that I know teachers, this will resonate with teachers, I know, because I used to say this at workshops, and the heads would nod so furiously, I was worried that they would drop off at times. But this happens to me time and time again. A scale like E major in contrary motion, perfectly symmetrical. I mean, one of God's gifts, really, isn't it? Compared to F sharp minor in Oxford, which is suicide material for most students. But, so they're doing E major in contrary motion lesson after lesson, and honestly, they could be on Facebook at the same time. And then I run a practice exam, in the studio 2 or 3 days before, and I don't talk and I don't carry on, and I'm sitting there very severe.
Sorry, I thought you just said you don't talk and you don't carry on.
I would choose to ignore that. I almost have to stick sellotape across my lips. I sit there with my clipboard and I say things like G major, and I don't say good or bad. I say this is how the exam is. It nearly kills me. Yeah, okay. And when I examine, fair enough, I've actually got to be more controlled. So it is something within my repertoire. And so what often happens, the kids pick up on that formal ambience, and they start thinking about what they're doing, and they, for the first time, maybe in weeks or months, they suddenly have to think about what they're doing for E major and contrary motion, as an example. And invariably, they make a mistake and they can't get back onto the horse and keep riding. They just can't do it. And they know they've always been able to do it, and they say things like, oh, this isn't fair, I always get this right. I know they get it right. There's no difference, I say to them, between what happens here right now in this formal situation and what may happen in an exam room. You actually have to remind yourself that this is a symmetrical scale and that the black notes happen together. You have to make sure that you really know what you're doing, and you can't leave that to 3 days before the exam. And yes, at times we're all only human. That example comes from my own stable of students, so I do it too. But I try as much as possible from the very word go to look, even something like playing the scale of A major or any scale with one finger means they have to know the notes.
Sure.
You know, even that, it's, you know, you get a grade 8 student to play a melodic minor with one finger, and you'll be surprised at how many mistakes they make on the U-turn up the top. So they really have to safeguard against being on automatic pilot. And once you decide that you've got exercises you can give them that are going to save them from playing and practicing an automatic pilot, you know, it's just fun times. That's another one I could go on for years about, and I could.
Well, give us a few more examples of the ways you turn off autopilot. What do you get your students to do?
All right. Now, there are a stack of these exercises. Look, I'll run through as many as I can very, very quickly.
Sure.
I teach these different methods in two ways. If the student's the sort of student that works consistently, then I might introduce for one scale, let's take D major, another method every week, and it might take 3 months. If they've gone on camp and they've had the flu and whatever, and you really don't want to workshop study in G again and again and again, I run a boot camp on scales, and we do a whole lesson on 5 or 6 of these methods, and truly the kids love it. They absolutely love it. So, for example, the idea that appears at the front of the Hannon books, that is playing, let's see, there is a piano here. Well, it's a keyboard, but anyway, it's what I've got. So that idea that Hannon has of playing in different rhythms, brilliant method for scale playing, because what it does, it actually locates, different rhythms will locate the hot spot in a scale. For example, for a prelim student even, you don't have to wait till they're doing grade 8 to do this, but for a prelim student, A harmonic minor, that augmented second is possibly where they find it difficult. If you can find a rhythm, for example, I call this walk, walk, running. Which will just grab that hot spot, and you use successive different intervals, different rhythms all the time. They love it. You say things like, I bet you couldn't do this rhythm, or think of your own. You probably want to cut this one out too. It depends.
What's that?
Brace yourself, Tim.
I'm braced. Go.
I often ask students, look, think of a rhythm that you like yourself, and then try to play your scale in contrary motion to this rhythm. And it wasn't long ago that a student said, what about doggy poo, doggy poo? Mum is sitting on the couch thinking, what sort of show does Abe run here? And so the kids are going, doggy poo, doggy poo. Look,
whatever switches kids on and motivates them, I think is fine. You know, so let's go with it. You had one, because I went to one of your workshops. It was about either basketballs or green grass or something. Another rhythm.
Oh well, there are rhythms and there are accents too. And the problem, again, look, I want to get to a whole lot of this. I won't digress. I will just go for it now.
Yeah.
Accents, for example, what we're using different accents for is because there are normally, the default is playing in twos on the beat. So you find accents, for example, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and there are little ditties you can use for those: the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, galloping, 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 galloping. on the way to this lesson, I stopped for a Coke. On the way to this lesson, the sky's the limit in terms of creativity, but it actually allows kids to experience accenting different fingers, weaker fingers, and it gets them out of that default incredibly mind-numbing, especially because the fourth and fingers are weak. If there are accents that actually highlight the use of those fingers, that's great, or accents that manage to avoid the thumping,
thumb or whatever, yeah.
Thumb.
Yeah.
All of this is great for rhythmic steadiness, and if we can maximise or improve evenness within a scale, then all of that seeps over to repertoire playing. There are coordination things that we need in our repertoire, like playing staccato against legato, almost from day one when they're playing. The left hand's playing staccato chords. So we can, again, avoid automatic pilot by getting students to practice staccato one hand, legato in the other, staccato softly in one hand, legato loudly in the other, or not even just staccato, piano in one hand, legato and forte in the other. Mm-hmm. All of that starting the scale of C on D, which is basically playing the Dorian scale, but they don't have to know that, the Dorian. For more advanced students, cross rhythms on a basic scale, like 2 against 3, or 3 against 4. See, I can do it.
I remember you got me to do that in front of everyone at that workshop that I came to. It was good. It was a great challenge, though. I had to think about it.
Well, really the sky's the limit. The using double staccato, triple staccato even, then combining rhythms with double staccato, rhythms with what I was saying before, for example, playing a scale with one finger. It's incredibly challenging. Getting a prelim student to close his or her eyes and to play G major, one hand, one octave, just so they really get it. There's an F sharp in there. Before a student plays a note, you say, okay, we're going to be playing D major. What are the two? What are the two? How many sharps and what are they? And if they're more advanced, what's the relative minor? What do we add to that relative minor? So it's always conscious. If they're playing dominant seventh arpeggios, I can say this with total honesty, I never teach dominant sevenths without grilling them on where that dominant seventh is going. If it's the dominant seventh of C, even though I say the dominant seventh of C and it should be obvious that it's going to C, I get them very often to play the dominant seventh of C and then a C note or a C chord, so they know that they're playing a piece in C and they need an introductory chord. It's going to be the dominant seventh, so that there's knowledge about what they're doing all the time. And to incorporate that, I often get them to spend the whole week thinking of another method, and there's a Mars bar challenge that if they think of something that I can truly incorporate into my bag of tricks, then they get a whole bag of Mars bars. So there's playing in clusters, and every single scale where both thumbs of both hands coincide can be played in clusters. So here's B major, for example. B, 2 black notes as a cluster. E, 3 black notes as a cluster. B. There are lots and lots of scales that do that, and it just means, for example, F major, which is so tricky at the grade 2 level, I think it's introduced. It is. But if students play in clusters, the whole hand moves astride a whole group of notes rather than kids having to work out note by note what comes next. So often I'll just have a lesson where that we only use these methods. I'll say, okay, let's have F major in clusters. Now let's have F major in this rhythm. And kids, rather than blanching and, stammering with fear and trepidation, they'll love it. They'll bring it on. That's their attitude. Very often, if it's the one scale that we work on, I'll record on my MP3 recorder that scale at the beginning of March or whatever, or April, and then about a month or two later, and I keep that recording, a month or two later, I'll record the same scale after all of this work, and they can't believe where they've got to. And that in itself becomes the impetus for them to playing their scales that way. And of course, if they can succeed in their scales that way, then all passage work in their repertoire can be zhuzhed up and enhanced in the same way. And I've spoken for too long. Ask me another question.
But it was all gold. I was making notes as we were going. So let's summarise some of the ideas you had. You had playing a scale with one finger and one hand. You could even do that eyes shut if you really wanted a challenge, I guess. Playing in rhythms and getting students to make up their own rhythms.
In accents.
Using accents. Different accents, displaced accents, different articulations between the two different hands. I assume you could do sort of two-note slurs in one hand while staccato, all those combinations.
Look, the list is endless, but you can continue, and I'm even as you talk, I can
You're coming up with more things. So dynamics, we also talked about different dynamics between the two hands, and not just if the exam says crescendo to the top and back down. Wasn't one hand crescendo while the other one doesn't? Things like that. Eyes shut. You said as well, and asking questions before they do actually try out one of these scales. So to say, tell me about this scale. What sharps, flats has it got? What finger are you going to start on? What's the relative minor? What's that going to have a raised? Whatever, all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Hang on. Yes.
Did you drop something? What happened then?
You'll have to edit that out.
I thought you'd given up on me. You're just like
no, I hadn't given up. It was just, I'm thinking of when I remember I ran a workshop at Melbourne Uni for undergraduate students, and look, I'm having a very senior moment here because the lecturer who decided to sit in on my workshop all of a sudden sprung up out of his chair, and I thought, oh, what have I done? Have I committed some horrendous, heinous offence? And he said, you've got to also tell them to do this. And it was crossing your hands and playing a scale that way, which the kids absolutely love. It's just one of those insane things they do. And so and when you do that, and then you just keep on adding to that. Well, with crossed hands, play one hand soft and the other hand loud. So it's those sorts of methods. But
and I pretty much say to my students that if you're at home and you are playing a scale normally, i.e., start to finish, slowly with one hand, you are, unless that is the first time you've ever played that scale, you are not working efficiently. And I think the biggest argument that I've got for getting students to think about, and other teachers to think about the ways they're teaching technical work, is that our students have less and less time these days to practice, and it just reduces every single year. It seems to be harder and harder to get students to practice. So if they are not using their time efficiently, and we're not helping them see how to use their time efficiently, then we're doing them a huge disservice.
Yes, but look, there actually is a really important aspect that I want to just go back to, because I've been thinking my little bag of tricks and how I get them to revise scales, but I think it's also worth mentioning that there's an issue about how they actually get to learn the patterns and the formations, the scales in the first place.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that actually, and how you actually go about teaching the scale, and whether it's copy, it's patterns, it's reading, it's tetrachords. Yeah, what do you do?
Well, I would hate to think that here I am sitting here offering the Uber method of scale teaching, because everyone has their own method, I'm sure. But the method that I use is, I suppose, what I've done as a teacher from year dot, and I think we all do this as teachers, even with total beginners, when you sit there looking at that preliminary study or whatever, we need always as teachers to think of what patterns, what hooks there are to make this more palatable and digestible for the student. And I guess after years and years, 35 years of teaching, in my case, you get really good at just seeing patterns. So I guess a lot of teachers would do this. I'm quite sure. I'm not saying anything new or revolutionary here, but I think if you looked hard enough at absolutely any scale, there are patterns. Whether it's, I've got quite a number of ideas from Margaret Brandman's amazing book, Pictorial. Oh golly, I've actually got it listed here, and will I be able to find it? Yep, pictorial patterns for keyboard scales and chords, only in that she goes into all the different patterns, the visual patterns for scales. For example, E major being in contrary motion, E major being symmetrical. I truly believe that looking at any scale, you don't have to look very hard to find a hook. Another one that I've always used from Margaret Bannerman's book is the idea of Scouts and Peace. The Scouts, not that I ever went to Scouts, but that's the Scout salute, apparently. And the peace sign, a victory sign, peace sign, and so many scales where there are the area of the three black notes, so many scales employ Scouts there and peace where there are the two black notes, for example.
And always the same fingering is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Always 2 and 3, always 2, 3, 4.
So finding a pattern, and once the kids are conversant with that idiom, with that language, and you yell out, no, Scouts, peace. I mean, that's actually how I get to F major, because not only do I do it in clusters, but the clusters happen to be Scouts and peace clusters. So always finding patterns, and if you can't, sometimes I act dumb, although I don't have to try too hard to act dumb. But sometimes I say to students, look, I really can't think of a pattern for E major in contrary motion. What do you reckon you can find? And if they own it, and if it's their discovery, my God, it's permanent. It will outlast religion. I think. Yeah. If they can discover it themselves,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I don't know if it's that book, but I remember seeing a book where they had kind of negative and positive versions of the scales where they're either all flat, and I didn't realise, and I can't remember what the pairs were, but D flat major is the exact kind of reverse to the other one was. Yeah, B major or something. I can't remember.
I know. We haven't even touched on arpeggios yet, really, but just the whole idea of playing arpeggios, maybe not both in root position, but in contrary motion. It's such a great thing to do, to play a scale with the left hand playing the broken chord slowly so that it's... Sorry, that's another method. Playing one octave of the scale in the left hand, note for note, while the right hand's playing double or triple speed.
Yeah.
Left hand playing the broken chord, which is the basis of the arpeggio anyway. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to
that's okay. You
shade myself. But really, the sky's the limit. As long as teachers realise that in all of this, the hidden agenda is that you're not making the scale mind-numbingly automatic, and the floodgates are open then, and then it's just a creative field day, really, for teachers and for students then too.
Yeah. I think it's about being creative. Let's face it, and you almost have to kind of sit down. Now that we've given everyone all these great ideas, I would love to challenge teachers, if you haven't tried using any of these methods before, actually sit down tonight or wherever you are and actually just come up with some variations yourself that you'd like to try them playing. Make sure you can play them yourself first, and then try them with some students and see how they go. I think that's probably a really good next kind of step.
Look, the only other thing I wanted to, am I barging in, or can I just get another word in about scales? And because we've talked about ways of making the scales not on automatic pilot, teaching scales through patterns, but there's also, I think, another problem, and that is that really, when you count the number of scale items, when I say items like major or minor, similar, contrary, at any given level, for both exam boards, AME, B and ANSCO, there are a huge number of scales. Like, I think at grade 7 there are 75 different items that students can be asked. And that's not even saying right hand, left hand. That's just with the arpeggios and inversions. So there needs to be a method for just carrying and revising and keeping those scales simmering on the stove. And I did mention a teaching aid that I produced called the scale card system, and I won't go on that about that for too long here, but I will say that I've only just recently, finally, started up a Facebook page which is called Scale Cards for Piano. And so the product is explained there, but basically for every grade there is a set of scale cards, so that for grade 3, for example, everything students need to know is on the front of each card, and on the back there is actually the scale written out. And the cards are divided into three groups: unknown, okay, and perfect, so that quite apart from all the practice methods, this is just a way of keeping them going. And if a scale isn't perfect, then it goes into the okay pile. And I guess teachers over the years have done that with a jar for the bad ones, or whatever method. But this is all, it's
they're ready to go.
They're ready, and the cards feel good and look good, and they're easy to read. So I urge teachers to check out the Scale Cards for Piano website, and of course the cards are available in retail outlets.
Look, I'm glad you brought that up, because it is, even by the time students get to grade 4 kind of level, there are significant numbers of scales they have to learn and keep current. And so I'm glad you brought that up. And look, I'm sure there's, as you say, people have different methods, but I'm sure there's plenty of teachers out there who perhaps haven't thought too much about how to keep the old ones current. Well, they kind of assume that kids will keep playing them, but they don't.
Well, they often play them by doing all of the majors in a row, whatever, not in a row, like in a certain succession, no matter what the teacher might do at lessons. But at least with the scale cards, they can be mixed up like playing cards, and it's as random as it really is in an exam. Anyway. Yeah,
no, it's great. And I like a little app called Decide Now, which I've blogged about before. It's called Decide Now, and it's just to spin the wheel. So you can put, it's like a Wheel of Fortune. I don't know if that's an Australian thing or around the world thing, but you can write whatever you want on around the wheel, and the kids spin it or press a button in the middle, and it just stops on a random thing that they have to be able to play. So any kind of app or resource that keeps kids randomising their scale practice, I guess, is good.
You don't think that's going to entice them to get into Russian roulette, perhaps, at another level? I have to get that in.
I think we're safe.
I think we probably are.
Now, so what have you got any other books or anything that you use for scales necessarily? Like, do you actually get students to buy books of scales and how they're written out?
No, look, for many years, the reason that the scale card system came into being, like in the year 2000, is that I actually used to get my students all to buy scale manuals. And I'd say, they all religiously bought these scale manuals. And I'd say, well, page 72 or whatever it was, page 5009, you've got A or F minor, harmonic minor. But honestly, the kids would avoid all of that. And really, when you think of it, why would they open a publication like a scale manual anyway? I don't think you can really judge scales up in terms of a book that anybody would want to open. And so really, I've got to say, I do plug my own product, because those scale cards, each card is one bite-sized piece of information. And I do think kids learn better when they've got 2 cards for the week and that's all they've got to look at. But look, even if they're not going to use the scale cards, I don't know whether it can be done from a book. I think teachers need then to explain the scale at a lesson, one scale at a time, and have some sort of method that's going to keep the scales going and being revised, as well as methods of making those scales not fall into the category of automatic pilot playing. It's a really hard one, that one.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, that's a heap of information. It's great. And look, I really hope that teachers who are listening who send their kids for exams take on some of these ideas, and just as I said before, try out one of these suggestions. What we talked about, accents or articulation. I don't do that so much as I do rhythms all the time, and my kids know my silly words for rhythms.
They're great.
But accents and articulations, there's something that I can actually take away today and go, oh, well, I'd actually make a list and just have that on the piano so that I can remind myself to ask students to do their scales in those articulations or whatever it is.
Yes, especially that really simple one of just playing a scale with one finger. Like, who would go there even, but it's a great place to go.
I'm going to try that one for sure. That's great. Okay, Abe, have I forgotten anything else that you wanted to mention?
Oh my God.
That's not part of your 5-year life story.
The moment this podcast ends, I'll go and make myself a coffee and think, why did I mention?
I forgot this. Well, look, if you do, just email it and I'll make sure it goes in our notes page, because we're going to have links to all of these things we've been talking about in the show notes page.
Well, can I also say just one? Nothing to do with me. This is to do with you, Tim.
Oh, thank you.
Were you saying it might be nice? No,
No,
it is.
sorry.
It is. I have to say, I get so much out of your podcasts and about this fantastic service that you're offering teachers. There are times, look, I've actually got a Tim Topham sub inbox where I sometimes put things into and I haven't got the time to read them or to watch them, but then I'll drag them out and I'm never ever disappointed. That I just find them, especially recently, I've just got so much out of it. The more recent ones, my associate students, I've got 3 going at the moment. They just, it's like a gospel. Your
Great.
your podcast. So thank you very much. It's a really good thing you're doing, and I think we all appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much. No, it's great to hear. I appreciate it, and thank you for your time on your holidays. It's really appreciated.
Pleasure.
You can go back to the beach now and have your coffee,
I
whatever it is.
certainly will. Thanks.
All right. Well, look, I think we'll finish up there. Thanks again. And as I've said, we'll put all our links and ideas into a show notes page for people who are listening. And until then, I look forward to catching up with you very soon.
Good. All the best. Bye bye.
All right. See you later.